Today we are a little bit further south on the Somme than we are used to. We've explored a lot of British battlefield sites along the Somme. Well, today we are in the site of the ancient village of Fay. This is a village that was completely destroyed during the Battle of the Somme, and we're going to have a little look around and see what we can see. So today we're going to be taking a little walk and looking at a couple of sites related to the French battlefields on the Somme. Now, this is by no means going to be an extensive coverage of the front that the French held during the Battle of the Somme, but I definitely want to get onto that in future videos. Today is, I guess, a little bit of a taste, and we're going to a couple of sites in particular that relate to the French battlefields of the Somme. And we're starting just here at the ancient village of Fay, or maybe I should describe it as where the ancient village of Fay used to be. So the Germans had moved in and occupied Fay in the early part of the war. As such, that of course meant that the French fired artillery down on this section of battlefield, and the village of Fay was actually completely destroyed even before the Battle of the Somme began here. Of course, during the Battle of the Somme, there was even more artillery put down on this area. And as such, with this being a strong German position, the Germans had built machine gun posts and defensive trench lines into the ruins of the village here. That meant that the village of Fay was completely destroyed. Now, it's not the first time we've seen a village that was completely destroyed during a battle. We were at Fleury in Verdun, where the village was also completely destroyed. But here at Fay, there are literally just ruins left, and we're going to explore today. Now, you have to imagine, for the French people, the Great War was devastating. Of course, other countries, Britain and other Commonwealth companies, America, Germany, they lost thousands of men and families were torn apart. But on top of that, of course, it happened on the French land. It wasn't just family members that the French lost, they lost their homes. Now imagine, after the horrors of that, losing family members years away from home, imagine returning home to find absolutely nothing left, just ruins laying here. Now, as you first walk into the site here at Fay, you can see the ruins that are left here in front of us, and we're going to get onto those in just a minute. But they also have something really interesting over here. They have some maps that kind of show us the details of what's going on. So this is the Somme battlefield, and let's just give ourselves a bit of orientation by looking at the places we're familiar with. Here we have, for example, Beaumont-Hamel, the British sector of the Somme, Thiepval, Auvillers, Mamet, places that we're familiar with. Well, today we're down in the more southern section. We're right here in Fay. So as you can see, Fay was just behind the German front line, and the French attacked here on the first day of the Somme. Now, of course, they moved on through different phases. So you can see, actually, although the French had a huge amount of success on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, by the time they got to the 1st of August, the village of Fay here had been captured. Now, you can imagine, with the fighting back and forth over this area, what that meant for the land that we're currently standing on. Quite another interesting map that they've got here, which shows us the entire Western Front, and this is always fascinating to me because it gives us an idea of just how big the Western Front was compared to maybe sometimes what we think. So of course we've been in Ypres before, and we've looked at the front up there and where Passchendaele is, or the Battle of Passchendaele, and of course down to the Somme section. Now, when we talk about the Somme front line is basically just this area here for the British, and of course bigger for the French. But look how far the Western Front carries on beyond that, down through Verdun, where we've been before, but all the way down to the Swiss border. It's just good to look at something like this because it really just reminds us how vast the Western Front actually was. Okay, so now we've come forwards a little bit and we are stood right in the middle of what was the village of Fay. And I can tell you, other than some rocks in the ground, there is not very much here. But let's have a look at the bits that we can still see. Okay, so here ahead of us and to the side is the village of Fay. And you can see the remains in the ground here. You can almost see where you can see where, I guess, wall lines would have run along here. And I noticed they've got a couple of these little information plaques, which I can't see from here, but I wonder if they are a little bit like the ones that we saw in Fleury, where perhaps we can get an idea of what some of these sites were. Okay, so that's actually a real shame, because I imagine maybe at one point this plaque here perhaps told us what this was in front of us. So I actually don't know, I can't tell you, but there was a building of some sort right here in front of us in the village. So from the site we were just looking at, we're just walking a little bit further along the path here, and there is another one of these information plaques. I'm a little worried that perhaps it's not going to tell us anything different either. No, unfortunately it looks like it is gone. I don't know if they're permanently removed or maybe if they're just gone sort of temporarily whilst there's a bit of work done on the site, but that's a real shame. I hope that they do bring these back here so that people can see. Okay, so information plaques or not, the next site here I know exactly what it is because I did some research before I came, and this is the site of the church in Fay. So look, really fascinating here. We are walking into the entrance area of what used to be the church here in Fay. Nothing but rubble remains now. Sit here and stones. You can see where the walls used to run and just rubble sat everywhere, completely destroyed by artillery fire. And then of course the fighting pushed straight through here, so French soldiers would have pushed right through here during the Battle of the Somme. I imagine there'd be countless men, French and German, who were killed on the land right here in front of us. Now here's a piece towards the kind of back of the church site that I believe has been kind of recreated. So the original rubble line was here, but then you can see there's kind of like some sort of concrete laid over the top in the shape, but this is where the chapel sat. So right here in Fay, you can see where this line runs across. If we just come into the shade a bit so you guys can see from the lighting. Wow, that's really cool that they've done this bit here. Now, we talked about soldiers who died here in the battle. Now, I'm just looking at this sign. Now, I'm just trying to work out exactly. So this is in memory of soldiers, and there's 4 soldiers named on there. I think it's going to be combatants who died 1st of July to the 8th of September 1916. So during the section of the Battle of the Somme that was fought on this ground. I was wondering if it was initially men who died in this area, but I actually think a lot more French soldiers than that would have died in this area. So I'm going to guess that that is probably 4 soldiers from Fay who were killed between those dates during the Battle of the Somme. Now, the people of Fay did return, and quite rightly, they should be able to return to where they lived. Sadly, though, there was nothing left of their village. So whilst they didn't return to the site just here behind us, about 100 metres up the road, we have the spot where they did return to. So about 100 metres up the road from the site of the ancient village of Fay, we have the edge of the new village of Fay. So this is the site of Fay now, and there is a village there, there's some houses and some buildings beyond where we're stood right now. So the village of Fay survived, it still exists, but it is just a few hundred metres up the road from where the ancient village of Fay used to be before the Great War here. So this has been a really interesting visit here, and I'm happy to see it, but also a little bit sad because I get the impression it's quite overgrown. The information panels are quite dirty. The smaller information panels that show you where the places are disappeared. So I get the impression that this is a site that is not very often visited, and that's a shame, and maybe that's something that should change. I don't necessarily know what I can do about that. I will have a look into it and see if maybe there's someone I can contact to ask. But it's a fascinating site. It's great to see that something like this has been done to kind of commemorate where the chapel used to be. But when you think of sites like this and think of somewhere like Fleury, for example, it feels like maybe more could be and maybe should be done with a site like this. Okay, well look, this isn't the only spot we're visiting. We've got somewhere else to head to, just slightly further north from here. Let's go. So we've just come a little bit south, about 5 minutes drive from where we were, and we've come down to the village of Soyecourt or Soyecourt possibly. I apologise, and I'm out here trying my best with this French pronunciation. But the fascinating thing here is that you can see the remains of the German frontline trenches. So this is the position that the Germans held on the first day of the Battle of the Somme here. Now, the French didn't manage to capture these positions straight away. They moved through and captured these trenches here on the 20th of July 1916. So this is really fascinating, the German trench lines here. So along here would have been the frontline German trench, and with the communication trenches coming away, just behind the German front line here, this huge shell hole. Really interesting site. So they've got kind of like a walkway where you can walk through here and see what's going on. You can't walk out into a lot of the ground, but let's go and check it out and see what we can see. Okay, so at this site we have a plaque with something on it. This is a photograph, and now I'm guessing that is actually what was on the plaques in the village of Fay. So here you can see French troops in the trenches here. So literally in these trenches just ahead of us. The French troops occupied this area from the 20th of July when they captured it through until 1917 when this section was taken over by the British. So here we've got another photograph of French troops holding this section of trench just here in front of us after they had captured it in 1916. So we're looking west here, so across the fields is where the French front line would have been, and the German front line just here in front of us. Now, the artillery here must have had this position absolutely zeroed, because everywhere you look is a shell hole. Just here we've got shell hole, shell hole, shell hole, shell hole, shell hole, shell hole, large shell hole, massive shell hole, massive shell hole, smaller shell hole, massive shell hole. So, you know, look, we often talk about the awful day that the British troops had on the 1st of July. Well, I tell you what, prior to the attack here on the 20th of July and the artillery bombardment that the German troops here had to deal with, my goodness, they must have had an awful day themselves. Now, as you come into the middle of the site here, there's this massive hole. Now, I've got to confess, I haven't been able to find out if that's the remains of a dugout that was here, or if maybe just some of the land has caved in from a huge shell blast. But that's interesting. There's almost like a cave that drops down there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little look at the French section of the Battle of the Somme. As we said, this is just a small part of it, and I'm intending on exploring more of it in future videos. But today I wanted to come to these couple of places by Fay and Soyecourt and have a look and see what there is to see along the French section of the Somme battlefield. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too. If you did, do all the little YouTube stuff for me on the bottom of the screen right here. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching. I'm going to see you on the next video.